Well, good morning, everybody. Today, X-Job downloaded. We're going to be interviewing Matt Telfer Maleary. Now, Matt is my cousin, so I've got a bit of an insight around what he's done previously. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Paul.
Thanks for coming over today, mate. It's great to see you. And, I suppose the icebreaker is, tell me a little bit about Matt Maleary.
Currently, thank you, by the way, for inviting me here. It's great to contribute to X-Job Downloaded. I haven't done many podcasts, so I really appreciate the invite to come here and do
You're
this.
welcome, mate.
So I live in Essex, about half hour away from here. I work in London for a security risk consultancy. I've got a wife of 10 years now, 4 wonderful kids. Life is pretty good. It's been a journey. That's for sure. At 43 years of age, I've got a few sort of tales to tell.
43.
I know. 43. Who'd have thought it? Huh? Jesus.
So, Matt, you come from a police background, or your dad was in the police, as was my dad and my brother, etc., etc. Now, as a kid, you lived in effectively police communes, didn't you? Lived in police housing, etc., etc. What was it like growing up as a son of a police officer?
Yeah, certainly for the early years, it was very much that. So I was born in Chelmsford when Dad was based there. We then moved to Harlow, and then from Harlow we went to Colchester. I think from Colchester down to Bournemouth. This is all related to Dad's career, sort of moving between forces, obviously different assignments, etc. He then dabbled with the idea of going out to Canada to be with the police force out there, but that didn't work out. And then I think from Bournemouth, that's when we moved to Lower Kirby Le Soken, down near Frinton there on the coast of Essex. And we then settled there because he found his position with Thorpe Traffic Division, and he stayed there for the rest of his career. So all those moves, they kind of happened within the first 5 years of my life. So I was born in 1979 and we moved to Lower Kirby in, say, 1984, 1985, about then. I have vague, kind of recollections of all the moving about. Excuse me. But really, the sort of key memories are really from, say, being in Lower Kirby, or certainly Kirby Cross to start with, which was into a police house. Yeah. And then Mum and Dad were able to buy a house in Kirby Le Soken in the family home that we had there for the next few years.
And the moving about as a kid does have an impact on you because it's around stability of schools, probably not so much for yourself, but for your brother and your sister. And it does, it has an impact. And of course, without going into the finer details, your parents, they split up, didn't they? So that has an impact on you as well.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. I obviously wasn't privy to the conversations between Mum and Dad when they were moving house. I'm pretty sure that at some point though, my mum would have said, look, let's just bloody settle somewhere, please. Geez, we've been moving about, let's settle somewhere and establish ourselves instead of jumping from sort of one town or one county to another. So, we were living in Lower Kirby. Dad was in the police. We were never affluent as a family, but we certainly weren't, sort of poverty stricken. My memories, certainly, sort of mid to late 80s, is that, we never really splashed out on loads, but I was never really wanting for anything. No. And, there was always food on the table. There's always clothes on our back. We always went to school. We were, a decent family, a proper family, however you want to put it. But then, as you refer to, towards the late 80s, I think it was, 1989, my parents separated. And as I say, even then, I was 10 at the time. I probably didn't give it as much credit as it deserved at the time. It didn't really seem too impactful upon me. I knew that people were upset. I knew that there was obviously this void from home because Mum was no longer there. But I'd say that the impact was probably greater on my older siblings. So Catherine, she's 7 years older than me. And then Simon, he's 5 years older than me. So they'd have been, sort of 15, 17 respectively. And I would imagine at the time it had more impact on them than it did on me as a 10-year-old at primary school. I mean, I was aware that, obviously I didn't see mum on a daily basis anymore. I'd kind of see her at weekends or whatever. I knew that dad had his struggles, although in honesty, I think he hid them pretty well from me, obviously conscious of my age and stuff and the impact it could have on me, I suppose, having my best interests at heart. I also knew that there weren't other parents of my schoolmates that were splitting up either. So that was a little bit weird. That certainly kind of didn't necessarily single me out, but it was only me that had parents that were splitting up. So I suppose it did have an effect. But as I say, probably not as much on me as Catherine and Simon. And from then, I think we just kind of got used to it, or certainly I got used to it, and just kind of carried on going to school. Obviously, the following year I went from primary school into secondary school. I just had my group of mates. I kind of got into a routine where Dad was obviously shift work, all of his career in the police. So I'd kind of see him fleetingly, kind of on occasion. Sometimes he'd be there in the evenings, sometimes he'd be there in the mornings, etc. So that was a kind of fleeting relationship. I'd see my mum at the weekends and any other time that I could do during the week. But obviously she was working herself as well. So I just kind of carried on. And as I say, that's where kind of, I suppose, the impact on Catherine and Simon was probably greater because they were that much older. Obviously, Catherine was going into work. Simon, after a couple of years in 1991, he joined the Royal Navy.
Okay.
So he then kind of left the scene as well, and I only saw him on, sort of rare occasions. So I suppose I just kind of found my sort of niche, sort of school, Monday to Friday, evenings, kind of doing what I wanted. Saturdays, typically with my mum. Sundays, kind of doing what I wanted with my mates, and that was just kind of the routine, I suppose.
Just move through it. So, So your brother then joins the Royal Navy, okay? And I know that you've always been into, the military, and it's always been a dream of yours. But explain to us what the motivation was for you to then go on and join the military yourself.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I mean, I had some early influences, which I'll touch upon in a moment, but while we're on the topic of Simon joining the Royal Navy, he was not necessarily key in that, but he was important because when you think of it, in that age bracket that I was in, that kind of early teens kind of period, sort of 12, 13, 14. This was in the early stage of his Royal Navy career, and he'd be coming home on his leave periods. I mean, we wouldn't see him for months, but then he'd come home on his leave periods, and, he'd always have money. He'd always be dressed in nice clothes, sort of designer gear and stuff. He'd be, going out and enjoying himself. He'd generally always have a girlfriend, an attractive girlfriend and stuff. So kind of from an impressionable young lad's kind of viewpoint, it would be like, well, this looks like a pretty decent way of life, and he'd kind of tell me stories of some of the things that he'd been up to as well. We'd kind of have conversations or, sort of family chats and stuff. And, it was, quite exciting. But if we go back to my sort of earliest influences, it would be going back to 1982 and the Falklands. So I was 3 at the time. I've been born in 1979. And we all have these, sort of vague memories of the early stages of our childhood. And I have very vague memories of seeing on the telly. And of course, the Falklands was quite well televised, probably more so than any conflicts that the UK had been in beforehand. The reporting on it was quite significant. So we were all exposed to it from our TV sets. And I vaguely remember seeing the guys with the green hats, the big rucksacks, the rifles, sort of marching down the track, and ultimately, liberating Port Stanley as it was in the Falklands War. And of course, those guys with the green hats with the Royal Marines. So that was an early influence, but I don't think I don't think it really drove me. I always liked the idea of joining the military, but it wasn't like, right, this is bang, you know, I'm going to do this, and everything that I'm going to do now from 3 years of age onwards or whatever, you know, wasn't gearing towards that. But I knew military was probably going to play a part. And then, as I say, going forward to 1991 onwards with Simon having joined the Royal Navy, I suppose that kind of cemented it. You know, I didn't have a huge amount of direction, as you probably guessed, in, you know, sort of growing up. It was quite a fragmented kind of existence, I suppose, with, you know, obviously dad in the police and you know, seeing mum at the weekends and stuff. It was quite fragmented. So, you know, there wasn't a huge amount of direction, but certainly military was always there. It was always an option, I suppose, something that I was erring towards. And yeah, as I say, Simon's involvement in that, and the, you know, him coming back and stuff on leave with money and nice clothes and tales to tell was, you know, it was appealing to me.
And of course, our grandfather was a member of the Royal Artillery. Joined up early, went out, did North Africa, did Italy, and then after the Second World War, he came out of the military and then rejoined and got captured in Korea. So, you know, and my dad was in the army. So it does have you know, those sorts of influences and the stories that they did or didn't tell, you know, it does have an impact. So you've gone through your schooling. You're now at Gunfleet, I assume. Was it Gunfleet?
It was Gunfleet, yeah. Well, Tendring High, as it was is known now and was known back then, yeah. So I was at Tendring High School, obviously the junior section in Thorpe, right next to the police station where Dad was working, of course, and then the senior section, so the fourth and the fifth year, as it was known then, yeah. That was at Frinton at the Triangle there, yeah. So we were still living close by. I mean, by this stage in the senior years of school, so as I say, the sort of fourth year, fifth year, as it was then, I was by this stage living with mum and my stepfather Duncan, who she'd obviously gone on to marry after separating from Dad, and then my little sister Sophie. So Sophie had been born in 1993, so sort of 14-year gap between me and her. And mum, Duncan and Sophie had set up home again in Lower Kirby still, because that's where Duncan owned his pub. And I'd moved in with him by this time. You know, there was a lot of moving about, you know, as you can gather. But by this stage, I was living in Lower Kirby with mum, Duncan and Sophie.
You've left school?
Yep.
What was the process that you went through to go into the military? How did that all work for you?
Well, as I say, it was always there on the back of my mind about a career in the military. And this was, I suppose, you know, driven further by there not being a huge amount of opportunities in the kind of Frinton, Walton, Clacton area. There wasn't a huge amount going on. I knew that the military was something that I wanted to do, and it was an option. I knew that it was a good lifestyle because of the circumstances with Simon, of course. So I left mainstream school and went into college or sixth form at Tendring High as well, studying art. But after a sort of few months, I thought, you know, I'm just not sure this is for me, really. I kind of really only did it because, you know, a couple of mates were doing it as well. So I thought, well, I'll give the military a go. You know, I've you know, Royal Marines, I want to give that a try. So I'll go down to the careers officer. I kind of set my sights on it. And went down there, rather embarrassingly now looking back at, but the first time that I went to Chelmsford Careers Office, expecting it to be a bit of a walk in the park, expecting them to welcome me with open arms and say, yeah, come in and join our, come in and join the UK military. And I soon had that rug, you know, sort of swiftly pulled from under me because I hadn't prepared myself at all, really, for it. I've done a little bit of reading up, but certainly not the amount that I should have done. And the guy behind the desk, you know, effectively told me, you know, you're not joining the military. You're not joining the UK military as you are currently. You need to go away. You need to, you know, confirm within yourself that this is definitely something that you want to do, that you're committed to it. Come back in 6 months. And, you know, if you do still want to do it in 6 months, then come back and we'll have another conversation then.
So how did that make you feel? I mean, bear in mind all the things that you've gone through as a child, all the different things, moving, separations, living with stepfathers, and so all of a sudden you've got a rejection that it's quite hard to come to terms with. How did you feel?
Well, I was gutted. Clearly I was gutted, and I mean I'd gone in there with the Royal Marines in mind because they were the early influence, and I knew that they were the elite.
You'll get some paras that will be throwing things at the radio now.
I'm sure they will be. Yeah, of course, yeah, and of course, I've worked with the paras, and yeah, if there are any throwing things at the radio at the moment, don't worry, I've got some good feedback for you coming. Don't worry. But it was the Royal Marines that was this kind of appeal to me. But yeah, this rejection, it was hard to take, and I went back, and I guess I went into a bit of a sulk for a while about it. But it's interesting, all feedback, all these lessons are good to learn from. And what it did teach me is, sort of preparation is key. The 6 P's. Prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. So I kind of went away. I kind of licked my wounds and thought, I do want to do this. I really do want to do this. So let's start preparing better for it. But also, and this isn't meant to be derogatory towards the Royal Navy, far from it. But I lowered my expectations as well, as opposed to going into the Royal Marines straight from Civvy Street, straight from school, as it were. I'd had conversations with my brother about the Royal Navy and thought, if I really want to get into the military, I want to give myself the best chance of success. And there's more chance of me getting into the military by joining the Royal Navy than there would be the Royal Marines. So that's what I settled on. I did all my research and my preparation around the Royal Navy. I also had further conversations with Simon about it. And then 6 months later, after that 6 months had passed, I went back into the careers office, feeling a lot better as well. I tidied myself up, because I was your typical, sort of greasy teenager, scruffy little toad when I went originally. But 6 months later, I went, I was sort of dressed in a suit. I, brushed my hair. I got myself well prepared. I know, hair, hard to believe looking at us now. Yeah, hair in the Maleary family, whatever next. But yes, I went back after that 6 months. And immediately felt better and more confident about it. I actually spoke to the same guy, and he could tell that I'd gone away and done some preparation. I'd taken his words on board and had shown a level of commitment and managed to get through that, that initial interview stage. So I was then offered a start date to go down to HMS Raleigh down in Tor Point in Cornwall to start my training. And this would now be, what would it be? It would be 1996. So summer of 1996.
So when you went through the interview process, or did you have to do a test at the recruitment centre?
Oh, I'm trying to think back. I suppose it was not so much a test, more an assessment kind of through interview.
Sure.
They'd obviously gauge from their questions to you, your responses, how committed you were, what you'd learned about the Royal Navy, what you knew about the Royal Navy. So it wasn't necessarily a kind of sit down and have to write out, sort of questions or whatever, but it was a kind of a Q&A sort of interview.
And when did they tell you that you'd passed and you'd been accepted?
God, I have a feeling it was there and then.
Oh, really?
I think so, yeah. I think so. I may be mistaken. I'm sort of trying to remember back. But
and were you on your own, or did you go with it?
I was. On that occasion, I was on my own, yeah.
So you had no one to tell, no mobile phone to text your mates?
No, absolutely not. Not in 1996, no. But I do remember, and this is what makes me think that it was an immediate yes or no about getting in, because I do remember travelling back from Chelmsford to Frinton feeling pretty pleased with myself.
Yeah, big smile on your face.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I can't remember, again, sort of what the period was between that good news and me starting down at HMS Raleigh, but I don't remember it being very long. I don't think it was very long at all, maybe a couple of months or something.
So you're 17 at this point?
Yes.
17.
Just 17.
So, your folks put you on the train at Frinton and you're off to Portsmouth.
Plymouth.
Yeah, sorry,
down to Plymouth. Yeah, so you kind of get off the train at Plymouth train station, and there's a big board there saying, for HMS Raleigh, sort of follow these signs. And this was new to me, because growing up in Frinton, certainly Lower Kirby, a day out in Colchester is quite a thing. For a young wet behind the ears kid as I was, that was a big thing, so getting on the train and going to Chelmsford to the careers office, bearing in mind the first time I went, my dad had taken me, which probably didn't help me in the slightest, of course, having my flipping dad there in the careers office. No wonder they flipping told me to come back in 6 months. Yeah, and by the way, mate, come back without your dad, yeah. But it was a big thing, sort of going to Chelmsford and stuff, and now I'm kind of getting on the train at Frinton. I'm sort of going in via London on the train from Paddington down to Penzance, getting off at Plymouth and kind of seeing this sign, sort of go here, and you get met by this leading hand, I think it was, or a petty officer, Royal Navy, and then you get put on the bus and driven from the train station over the Tamar River. Over to Raleigh, and of course at this point, you're then starting to meet some of the other lads and lasses that are going to be joining up with you at the same time. So it was, when I get nervous as well, I typically would start kind of talking and trying to make a joke about the situation and stuff. So, trying to settle my own nerves, trying to settle the nerves of people around me as well. But I do remember it being a real sort of nerve-wracking time. And I'm sure it's the same, with the police, I dare say, other areas of the military, certainly. Yeah. But, going there, young kid, suddenly surrounded by, all these military people, and you start striking up, sort of friendships, with all the other lads and lasses that are there as well, because they're all in the same boat, of course. So you're trying to, sort of build those relationships, build those bonds, get through day to day. But I found it tough. And it was, I suppose, recognition of it being a good decision to go for the Royal Navy as opposed to the Royal Marines at that stage, because I arguably wouldn't have made it very far in Royal Marines recruit training at that stage, because I found the training for the Royal Navy to be tough enough. But we got through. As I say, we got through. It's the 8 weeks training, the basic training, and then you go on to your phase 2 training. And I'd joined up to become a steward, part of the logistics department. That's what Simon was doing. I had not necessarily experience in being a steward, but, sort of things like, sort of working in my stepdad's pub and stuff. There was just a couple of things that kind of crossed over, which I could use going into sort of phase 2 training, sort of working behind a bar, sort of waiting on people, stuff like that. So that kind of helped, and aligned with that, I didn't have too many qualifications coming out of school either. And this isn't meant, again, sort of derogatory towards the logistics branch at all, because stewards, chefs, stores accountants, etc., they all play a pivotal role in the military. But I didn't have too many options available to me. I certainly couldn't join up as an officer because I didn't have the GCSEs or the A levels or anything. And I couldn't go into any sort of technical level sort of role because I didn't have those qualifications for that either. So right. I was limited in my options, but I still considered it a good option. Simon certainly enjoyed absolutely. It. He was making a good career for himself. So I went into that, and it was interesting going into phase 2 training, the opportunities that present themselves, because I'd literally been there. What would it have been? Maybe sort of 2 weeks into the phase 2 training. So about 10, 11 weeks into my military career at that time from arriving at Raleigh, those sort of 10, 11 weeks prior. And there was to be a big Trafalgar night dinner over in Washington, D.C. at the Commandant General of the U.S. Marines, his base in Washington, D.C.
And whereabouts in Washington is that? Do you know?
Right down by the bloody White House.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, right there in the centre. So we were staying, well, I'll kind of step back a moment, but yeah, so they were looking for, because there was going to be a significant presence from the Royal Navy as well, and we're looking at flag rank here, all the admirals and stuff. They wanted Royal Naval personnel to be there doing the service.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, what a great opportunity. Bear in mind, I was only very early into my training. I was given this opportunity to travel out there with a couple of other guys in my training course as well. So we were picked from the group. We were sent to Heathrow and sort of ushered through the airport, to get on this BA flight, traveling business class over to Washington, DC. It was like,
very
bloody
cool.
hell, fantastic. I'd only been on one plane previously, going to Spain back in 1988 or 89. So kind of getting, I tell a lie. I had been on other holidays, but yeah, I'd certainly never traveled business class. So I was like, Jesus, this is fantastic. I'm kind of 10 weeks into my career, and already I'm being put on a plane and sent over to Washington, DC. So what a fantastic opportunity it was. And it was interesting while we were there. So we were staying in a hotel in Georgetown. We had a couple of days either side of the event to do some sightseeing as well. Obviously, I was only, say, 17 at the time, so I couldn't drink alcohol or anything. I was just kind of taking in Washington.
You still struggle with that, don't you, drinking alcohol?
Absolutely, yeah, it struggles with me. But it's, it was a great trip, but it was interesting. And going back to those early influences, at this stage, I still had this desire to want to become a Royal Marine. I knew that being in the Royal Navy would help me. The Royal Marines are obviously part of the Royal Navy. If I wanted to transfer to the Royal Marines, I knew that there would be the opportunity for me to do so. And this trip kind of helped that as well, because we were on a US Marines base. We were doing quite a lot of engagement with US Marines as well. And inevitably, there would be conversation about the British Royal Marines, the Royal Marines Commando, and of course, already had this kind of desire to join them, and that was strengthened by some of these conversations I was having, where these US Marines, they were, the way they were speaking, they were kind of worshipping the ground that Royal Marines, step on, and to me, it was like, this was really kind of cementing it, the Royal Marines, they're held in such high regard.
Absolutely.
Obviously, they're one of Britain's elite fighting forces, and it was, really strengthening this desire. So, I didn't want to allow it to affect my day job. I was still very much enjoying being in the Royal Navy, but this little nugget in the back of my head that was saying Royal Marines, Royal Marines, Royal Marines, it was starting to grow. So anyway, so we got back from DC. I finished off my training. I went to my first shore base, which is down in Devonport, HMS Drake, and you kind of use that time to kind of put into place and put into practice everything that you've been taught. So I spent a good few months there, as an able rating, as a sort of legitimate, if you like, sort of member of the Royal Navy, no longer in training, and it was good, sort of built some good friendships and good relationships, kind of perfected my art, as it were. You then do further training in things like, sort of firefighting and ship survival, that type of thing, before getting on board your first ship, before being drafted onto your first ship. So I was drafted onto HMS Invincible, which was I think it was the UK's flagship at the time. So, it was getting the nice trips as well. So, I joined there. And I mean, that was an eye opener to me, bearing in mind that actually by today's standards, 60,000 ton aircraft carriers that we've got now, HMS Invincible, the Invincible class carriers are only sort of 20,000 tons. But even that size, driving up to it in a taxi, because I kind of got to Portsmouth with all my bags, all my kit, jumped into a taxi and got taken to the ship. And I remember kind of driving up alongside it to the gangway and just thinking,
blimey,
how the hell am I going to find my way around this thing? Jesus, I think it was a Saturday, I think. And I'm just like, I'm going to have a night. I'm never going to find my way around this. I mean, it's bloody enormous. And yet, by today's, by comparison to today's carriers, it's actually quite small at only 20,000. But yeah, I joined there, and, it's completely different. And I suppose I can liken it, to a boarding school, I suppose. You sort of get put into your mess deck, your kind of accommodation block. You're with people in the same types of role as what you're doing, and you build this real bond amongst, the people that you share your accommodation with, a real strong friendship, because, ultimately you're all there to make sure that, the ship can carry on doing what it needs to do, and, I was clearly very nervous at this time. We went off on our first deployment, and I'm trying to think where it was. I think we went down to Spain. We spent some time down in Cadiz, and then we went over the Atlantic, over to the east coast of America, and did some exercises and sea trials with the US Navy. So it's good.
So I'll come back to that. But so you've gone to Cadiz, which is where in 1805, that's where the Battle of Trafalgar took place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what was that like? You've got Trafalgar. Did you sail through there? I mean, as a Royal Naval, I remember the Royal Navy. That's the most iconic battlefield in naval history. How did that make you? Was there any consequence? Did you feel that there was anything there, or was it just another part of the Med?
No, not at all. I mean, we went there purposefully because it was around about that time. It was certainly a few weeks later, maybe a couple of months later, whatever it was, after that sort of Trafalgar night dinner that I was saying about. So there was some, there was reason for us going there. Looking back at 1805 and the Battle of Trafalgar. Yeah, and I'm so proud, as I know probably everyone listening to your podcast, so proud of the military history of the UK, certainly the Royal Navy, certainly going back to Nelson and the other great admirals, and it really struck a chord with me being in that area, sailing through that area, knowing that, sort of nearly 200 years ago at that point, we were in 1997, nearly sort of 200 years ago, this amazing battle took place that really established us as, the greatest fighting force the world had ever known at that time, if you like.
Rule Britannia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was awe-inspiring, inspirational stuff. And again, don't get me wrong, I was really proud of my time, and I remain really proud of my time in the Royal Navy. I just always had this desire for the Royal Marines as well.
So you've gone over, sorry, I'll cut in there. So you've gone over to the States and you've done a bit in the States. At what point do you start then looking to move across to the Royal Marines? How does that all work for you?
Yeah, so as I say, it was always there in the back of my mind about joining, and it was quite interesting. So we had other guys in our mess deck, in our accommodation block. There were four of them, four guys, and I can't remember their names for the life of me, but they were, really, we used to nickname them the bosuns. They were the real fit guys, the sort of meatheads, if you like, sort of want of a better term. They'd always be in the gym, they'd always be doing the circuits, etc. And one of the guys I worked with very closely, he was another steward, but he was looking at transferring over to the Royal Marines at that time. So I almost used him as an inspiration. I had conversations with him, why was he doing it? I was, speaking to him about my own aspirations to do the same. And I suppose we encouraged one another. And as I say, it was around that time, I was really enjoying my time in the Royal Navy. And I think by this time, we'd gone down into the Med as well. We'd done some time actually on operations as well, because sort of 98, the British and the US had started sending bombing sorties into Baghdad because it was starting to get a little bit messy there. So Operation Bolton, etc. So we were going on operations, and it was just this little feeling in my head. This is operations. This is the exciting stuff. But I'm on board a ship, and again, this isn't derogatory towards the Royal Navy at all. But I was, with operations, if I was going to be on operations, I sort of wanted to be the guys on the ground. I wanted to be the sort of boots on the ground. So that was kind of strengthening this desire to want to transfer to the Royal Marines as well. So yeah, I was having these conversations with this guy about it, and it came to the point I just said, you know what, I've got to do it. I've got to do it. If I don't do it now, I never will. And I really do want to become a Royal Marine. So I put in my transfer request to my divisional officer, my sort of line manager. And he was a little bit disappointed about it because I think he saw some potential in me in the logistics branch. But, he respected my wishes. He signed off on it. And from then, I suppose, once it was signed off and I knew that I was definitely going to be becoming a Royal Marine, or at least attempting to become a Royal Marine, that's what really flicked the switch.
Okay.
And that's when it became really serious for me. And these four guys, including the guy that I was working with, they were really, really fit, really strong. They were always down the gym, always doing circuits and stuff. And I just knew that I had to not only get as fit as them, but I had to get fitter. And again, going back to the situation at the careers office, where clearly I hadn't prepared the first time I went there, and it had come back and bitten me on the backside. I thought, I've got to prepare. I've got to do all that I can to get as fit as possible, because I'm going to be doing the potential recruits course, which is 3 days down at Lympstone, down at the Commando Training Centre, Royal Marines. You do this 3-day potential recruits course where they then determine, yes, you can then start full training, or no, you haven't got the potential for it, and you go back and try again later. So I thought, first hurdle, potential recruits course. I've got to get myself as fit as possible for that. And I had the date for it. So I literally spent, when I wasn't working, when I wasn't in the wardroom or doing what I was doing in my work life, I was down the gym. I was doing the circuits 2-3 times a day. I was putting weight on my back and running around the flight deck. I was doing absolutely everything I could to be the best possible version of me. I had all of the tools at my disposal. We had all the stuff on board ship to enable you to get fit and to stay fit. And these 4 guys in the mess deck were the inspiration. I want to get fitter than them. And as I started getting fitter and my endurance was building, and obviously, my body shape was changing, so I've never been so fit. I sort of found myself getting more and more competitive, to the point I was like, I'm not just going to get fitter than these 4 guys. I'm going to get fitter than everyone on board this ship. We've got physical training instructors on board. We've got, lots of other guys that sort of try to keep themselves very, very fit. I am going to become the fittest person on board this ship, because then I know I will be as well prepared as I can be for this potential.
And of course, every Royal Naval vessel has a detachment of Royal Marines. So were there Royal Marines on Invincible at that time?
There weren't. No, there weren't. No, not on board Invincible. No, so we didn't have any on board at all. No. But I suppose even though they weren't on board, I suppose with me, and certainly the other guy as well that I was saying about that was transferring over to the Royal Marines as well. He went off, he did the potential recruits course, he was successful with that. He then started full training for the Royal Marines. But he didn't make it. He came back,
right, okay.
And he considered himself to be in some disgrace at having failed. He considered it personally to be a disgrace on his part that he'd failed.
But
obviously,
it's not a disgrace at all,
No,
is
absolutely
it?
not. I say that, to the rest of us, it was like, geez, you gave it your best shot.
Best, yeah.
You've still got the Royal Navy. I mean, geez, you've still got a great career ahead of you.
And if it was that easy, everybody would
absolutely,
do it,
absolutely, yeah. So he came back. Obviously, I was transferring, and although we're sort of 1,200 strong on board a carrier, you still know one another's business.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't term it as sort of celebrity status or anything like that, but people knew that I was becoming a Royal Marine. The Royal Navy, although they will sometimes struggle to admit it, they hold the Royal Marines in very high regard. So, I was... It sounds stupid, I was known. It sounds stupid.
No.
But people knew I was transferring. So there's a lot of conversation. If I'd be going to, sort of meal times or wherever, and it'd be like, oh yeah, you're transferring to the Marines, aren't you? And all this sort of business. And I'd be going to the circuits, and where previously I'd be struggling because I didn't have this sort of level of fitness, previously, I would be knocking it out the park. We'd be doing fitness tests and I would be consistently the highest achiever. We'd be doing rowing competitions on the flight deck and I'd be smashing that out of the park. But, we'd be doing the bleep tests and I'd be, sort of running the PTIs into the ground. They'd be kind of dropping off at the 11s and 12s. I'd be staying on to the sort of 13s, 14s, 15s levels, a kind of Olympic athlete kind of level, so I was kind of building up this status on board ship, if you like, being this kind of super fit guy that was really, really intent on joining the Royal Marines. So, so I got myself to this great level of preparation. I went off to the potential recruits course, and passed that. Came back to ship and then awaited my dates to join the Royal Marines proper, to go down and start the 32 weeks training. And it's funny at this time, even though me and Simon were in the Royal Navy at the same time, we didn't see one another that often, because he'd be off on his ships and deployments. I'd be on mine. We'd occasionally bump into one another in Portsmouth, or we'd occasionally go on the same period of leave and we'd kind of go home and spend time with family over Christmas or whatever the case may be. And he'd by that stage, he'd been shown an interest in joining the Royal Marines as well. I think his motivators for it were a bit different to mine. I think he wanted to, maybe sort of prove to himself that he could do it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with me, I had a bit more desire. I'd kind of always had it in the back of my mind, if you like, as I sort of touched upon earlier. So I think our motivators for joining it were slightly different, or for joining the Royal Marines were slightly different. But as it was, we were doing the same kinds of things at the same time. So he'd done his potential recruits course a few weeks before mine. He'd done very well on that. I then did my potential recruits course. I did very well on mine. And we then found ourselves being given the same date to join the Royal Marines.
That's cruel.
It is, but I can kind of understand. I'm sure there must have been a level of engineering.
The name
by the
Maleary,
hierarchy.
there aren't many people called Maleary,
No,
full
absolutely.
stop. And so the hierarchy, whoever made the decision, that was probably a cruel thing to do. But anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, we saw it as actually quite a good opportunity, because we were always, within ourselves, we were always very competitive with one another. Obviously, Simon had always had the sort of age benefits, obviously being 5 years older, 5 years, sort of stronger, fitter. But now, kind of where we were 1999, so I was 20. He was, what would he have been by then? He'd have been 25, of course. So we were on a bit more of an even keel. So actually, we saw it as quite a good opportunity. We were sort of being pitted against one another,
healthy competition.
if you like. Yeah, healthy competition. So it's interesting when even though you're transferring, it sounds like you don't have to do all the hard work when you're transferring from the Royal Navy to the Royal Marines. You do. We actually had to leave the Royal Navy and hand our ID cards in at the start of April, spend 4 weeks not doing much, to be honest with you, before then joining the Royal Marines together on May the 3rd. So Simon was in a relationship with his now wife, with Sue by this stage, and he was living with her in Portsmouth. And I really saw that as a great opportunity for us both, really, to keep ourselves in the game.
Yeah, of course.
And not allow those 4 weeks to, sort of lead to, if I was at home, for example, just bloody going to the pub or whatever the case may be. So, so I stayed with Simon and Sue for that 4 week period. And, Simon and I would continue doing our training. We'd buy all the relevant kit and stuff. And then we were ready to go on May the 3rd. So we travelled from Portsmouth together to Exeter and then down to Lympstone, to the Commando Training Centre Royal Marines. And it's funny, I'll kind of come on to a little bit more detail in a minute, but even at that stage, on that morning of May the 3rd, bear in mind at that stage, I'd had relationships, I'd had girlfriends, but they were all very casual. I didn't have a girlfriend at that time. No. My focus was purely Royal Marines, becoming a Royal Marine. Simon had been in a relationship with Sue for, I don't know, I don't think it had been as long as a year, but certainly touching upon that, maybe about a year, something like that, maybe a little bit less. But even on that morning of May the 3rd, I could just sort of tell within him that, maybe his appetite for joining the Royal Marines wasn't quite as strong.
Does he know this? Because he's going to hear this at some point.
Yeah, I think he must do. I think, if he listens to it, I mean, I'm sure he would kind of look back and say exactly the same. And certainly, sort of as we go through training and stuff that I'm going to elaborate on in a moment, it will become a little bit more apparent. But it was just that kind of, I didn't have anything to worry about. I didn't have a relationship. I was just committed to doing the Royal Marines. And of course, if you want to join something like that, if you're committing yourself to 32 weeks training, and it's going to be bloody hard training, that's probably the best place you can be, without any outside influences or anything. I think with Simon, he had Sue to think about, who he was clearly, in a very loving relationship with. So I think even at that early stage, he probably, was wrestling maybe with his emotions a little bit. I've got Sue in Portsmouth. I'm joining the Royal Marines. I may not be based in Portsmouth very often, etc. So maybe there's little things. But that kind of soon played second fiddle, because you go down to Lympstone and you're immediately kind of immersed in the Royal Marines way of life. and it was interesting. I was kind of 3 years into the Royal Navy at this time. So recruit training, that type of environment was already a little bit, it was quite alien to me by that stage. And of course, Simon, he hadn't been in recruit training for 8 years. He'd been, he joined in 1991. So it was probably even more alien for him. But we soon got into it, and you kind of get into your routine, your sort of meal times, you're doing your kit, you're living in the dorm again. And I suppose beneficial to us both, having been in the military, even though the sort of recruit training was a little bit alien to us at that time, given the years that had passed. We still got into it. We knew what we needed to do. Whereas, of course, we were surrounded by young guys who had never been there. Some guys that were, the kind of 16, 17-year-olds, that I'd been. And some of them were really lost, and you always hear the tales, the kids, sort of crying into their bloody pillows the first night of recruit training because they've suddenly come to the realization, Jesus, this is real, and do I really want to do this or not?
That horrible man shouting at me.
Absolutely, yeah. And those first couple of weeks, you really kind of whittle out a lot of people. The commitment is really tested. So we started out with 56, but those numbers started dwindling pretty quickly. With a couple of people leaving each week. And it was either because, they just didn't want it, or because they were failing things. They weren't doing well on, their kind of exercises out in the field. They weren't doing well with their fitness. They weren't, just weren't achieving the requirement. Yeah. Whereas for Simon and me, we were doing pretty well. There were some other high achievers in there, but generally sort of me and Simon were doing pretty well. We were always there or thereabouts. And, I can be very single-minded, in my, in my approach to achieving things. And the way I saw it, even though we were there as a group and we were there to, sort of help one another through, I really saw the other high achievers, including Simon, as the competition. I wanted to be the best. And there's always this kind of saying, about being the grey man, in recruit training for the Royal Marines, you should be the grey man, sort of just blend into the background. Don't do anything to sort of highlight yourself, just get on with it, do your day job. Don't really stick your head above the parapet, just get on with it. If you want the best chance of passing recruit training, just get on with it, be the grey man. It was always kind of termed. That doesn't really wash with me or with Simon either. We would naturally, take on the sort of leadership role when we were on exercises. We would be given direction to, sort of other people. We'd be taking the lead on things. We'd be sort of leading in the sort of mock firefights and stuff like that. He was with one group, I was with another group and stuff. So that whole grey man concept didn't really, sort of tap into either of us. Sort of we were there, we were doing well. We knew that we had a bit of an advantage having, a bit of service behind us. And we were working very, very hard. And I was in competition with him and some others. And I dare say he felt the same way in reverse. He was in competition with me and others as well. And we carried on through training, and of course it gradually gets tougher. It gradually gets harder. My dedication, it was just complete focus. I didn't have any other thoughts outside of the Royal Marines. And it was interesting, as I say, the exercises get harder, the fitness gets harder, everything gets tougher. The instructors get angrier. It's all that kind of way. And I think it got to about week 10, week 11. We'd been out on exercise, out on Woodbury Common. And the sort of exercises by that stage are kind of going out on a Monday, you're coming back on the Friday. They're obviously very, very physically demanding, even at that earlier stage of training. And then it's all about getting your kit sorted, after exercise, getting all your kit washed down, all ready for muster on the Saturday morning. And then assuming everything's good, kind of on the Saturday, you can kind of go out, you can have a few beers or whatever, and, then have an easy Sunday, and then it all starts again on the Monday. And it was a Saturday after an exercise. I can't remember the name of the exercise that it was, but, we'd all found it really, really demanding. We'd all gone out for a couple of beers on the Saturday night. I'd got back, and it wasn't a significantly late night. But I got back. I was just kind of settling down and starting to think about what I was going to do on the Sunday, ready for the Monday. And Simon approached me and really, sort of spilled his heart out, I suppose, about his feelings, about how he was, sort of struggling with the concept of becoming a Royal Marine, because obviously he had Sue in Portsmouth. He also was carrying a couple of injuries as well. He'd always been very physically able, very physically robust. But of course, with the Royal Marines, when you're, steadily carrying heavier and heavier packs, Bergens on your back and all the kit that goes with it, if you've got any niggling injuries, that type of training is always going to, emphasize it. So he had a bit of a lower back problem as well, which I think was starting to struggle. I think there was just a litany of things that was contributing to him thinking, I just don't think the Royal Marines is going to be right for me. So he came to me, and I don't know what he was expecting me to say. I don't know what he was expecting from me, whether it be empathy or sympathy or guidance or what, I don't know. But I was probably, looking back at it now, probably quite dismissive of him, because my mind, my focus was just on, Monday, getting through it, becoming a Royal Marine. So I didn't really give much sort of credence to this kind of feeling that, this information that Simon was giving me. And I was just kind of of the view, if that's your decision, then crack on. That's your decision, but I'm going to be carrying on, and best of luck to you. So he made the decision, and it must have been a tough decision for him as well, because he would have made a good Marine. For that, I have absolutely no doubt. He was doing well. He would have made a good Royal Marine, but he had his reasons for not doing so. So he made his decision to leave. He put in his request to kind of return to the Royal Navy. That was accepted. And I just carried on doing what I was doing. As far as I was concerned, it was like, well, there's one of the competition out of the way.
How do you feel about that now, though? I mean, you are close to your brother.
And very much so.
But how, that is, and like you say, it's quite dismissive. But how do you feel about that now? If you did it again, would you be the same?
I would like. I don't know. I don't suppose I've really ever thought about it. No. I think I probably would be exactly the same, to be honest with you.
Fair enough.
Me and Simon, we're pretty straight with one another about things, with our sort of decision making and stuff. And I think I'd probably be the same. Whether he'd have, if roles were reversed and I'd have gone to him because, I'd had injuries, I was in a relationship or whatever, whether he'd have been the same with me in reverse, I really don't know. I can't say. Only he could tell you that, and maybe you'll have to get a podcast with him.
Well, I think we'll get him up here and do one with all three of us.
Yeah, maybe so. But that was the situation anyway. Excuse me. Back then, it was my focus was becoming a Royal Marine.
Yeah.
Him going. Got one area of competition out the way, and I could just crack on. And this was I was approached about this by the training team as well. So the training team in recruit training, you've got 4 corporals who kind of manage the sections. You've then got a troop sergeant, and you then have a troop commander who's typically a sort of lieutenant or a captain, who kind of runs the show. And my corporal, a guy called Corporal Burns, he approached us that following week and said to me, he said, well, obviously your brother's going, for his own reasons. Have you got similar thoughts? Are you thinking of going back to the Royal Navy as well? And again, I was quite dismissive again about the whole notion of it, to the tune of absolutely not.
Yeah.
The only thing on my mind is getting the Green Beret, is becoming Royal Marines. Simon, he's his own man. He's sort of 25 at this stage. If he wants to go back to the Royal Navy, I wish him well, but that's not influencing my decision making whatsoever. I'm going to crack on and become a Royal Marine, and that's exactly what I did. Sort of Simon went back to the Royal Navy and sort of carved out a continued successful career there. I carried on with training, and of course the training then gradually, as I say, was sort of week 11, week 12 at that time. At week 15, it goes from the kind of basic infantry level training and starts moving towards the commando phase, so the exciting stuff, the going out in the helicopters, fast roping out of them, the abseiling, climbing up cliffs, the live firing exercises, etc. It really intensifies, and the training, obviously the physical element of it intensifies as well. And at this stage, they're starting to identify people with the sort of leadership potential, sort of people to sort of run the sections, sort of do the sort of role that the corporals were doing, because ultimately what they want at the end of the training is to be able to send their guys out to the units, to the fighting units. And for those guys to be completely capable, just to fit in, because, who knows, sort of as we saw with Afghanistan, certainly there were guys coming straight out of training, going to their units, and a couple of days later on a flight out to Kandahar or something like that, so you have to be, by the end of training, fully capable of, getting to your unit and being a fighting Marine. So as the training intensifies, they're on the lookout for people that can, that are showing leadership, that are showing promise. And I'd had by this stage, I'd become aware of the King's Badge. So back, we're going back to 1918, King George V, following the successful raid on Zeebrugge by the Royal Marines, King George V had gone to inspect a recruit troop down at Deal in Kent, and during the inspection, it was his instruction and his pleasure to say that he wanted every senior recruit troop in the Royal Marines to become known as the King's Squad. So for the last 2 weeks of recruit training, sort of once all of the, all the final exercises, commando tests, etc., had been done, the senior recruit troop would become known as the King's Squad. Okay. And within that King's Squad, if there was anyone that met the criteria, the exacting standards, as it's termed, that person would be known as the King's Badgeman. And this was, again, sort of given by King George V, the senior person within the senior recruit troop, within the King's Squad, if they meet the exacting standards, if they meet the criteria, they would become known as the King's Badgeman. It wouldn't be given to every King's Squad. You'd have to go through a sort of a further kind of selection, if you like. But if you met those standards, you would become the King's Badgeman. So I'd kind of had this kind of idea that would be, the Green Beret was always the focus, but this notion of becoming the King's Badge had been, had come to me as well. So then at week 25, the people that show the real leadership potential, they get known as the Diamonds, and they get to wear a diamond on their arm for the remainder of training. They're the guys with, say, the leadership potential, the ones that are kind of leading the sections. So I'd been made a diamond. Me and 3 other guys had been made a diamond, and that meant that we were effectively in the running to become a King's Badge. So I was interested at this stage, week 25, we still had the commando test to come. We still had, a couple of really big exercises to get through, but I was already pretty confident at that stage that the Green Beret was in the bag. So I was, sort of keen by this point to become a King's Badgeman. So as opposed to looking across the whole recruit troop and thinking, I'm in competition with all these guys, I was just looking at those other 3 diamonds.
It's
and
narrowed
thinking,
your focus.
Yes, absolutely. It's really narrowed my focus. And, they're the guys that I want to do better than. And that's how it played out. We did our exercises, we did the commando tests, and I hold my head up high. I know that I performed well in all of it. I did take a leadership role. Yep. So did those guys as well. But when it came to it, after we'd done all of the hard work, all of the tests, all the exercises, etc., the diamonds had been whittled down to just 2 of us. So me and a guy called Marine Hattrick, or Recruit Hattrick as he was known at the time. I can't think what his first name was because we all called one another by surnames, but Recruit Hattrick, he was the only other diamond. He was the only other one being put forward for the King's Badge board. So he became the competition, and he was a really, really good guy. He was a Geordie, really sort of proud, Newcastle supporter, very, very capable, clearly. Otherwise, he wouldn't be at that stage of training and he wouldn't be in the running to become a King's Badgeman. But yeah, it was kind of me and him. And the way the King's Badge works is, as I say, it's after all the tests have been completed and stuff, but you have to go through a sort of an inspection. You have to go in front of a board of senior officers who kind of give you a question and answer session on, core history and across the military. It's like a half day of sort of graft, if you like, sort of being assessed and evaluated to see if either of you are capable enough to be the King's Badgeman. So me and Recruit Hattrick were put forward for that. And it was interesting at this time with our training team, the six of them, the four corporals, the sergeant and the officer, the lieutenant, they'd all put bets on us as well. They'd been through us throughout the whole training. They knew us, probably better than our own bloody parents did by that stage. But they'd all put bets on between themselves who was going to get the King's Badge. And the sergeant, the troop sergeant, was a guy called Ron Sharples, so Sergeant Sharples. And he was your old school, Falklands veteran, rough around the edges, tough sergeant. Lovely guy. If you're on the right side of him, he was a lovely guy, but he was a real tough guy. Thankfully, I was on the right side of him. But he had his wager on me. The other five had them all on Hattrick. They're all sort of betting on Hattrick. So, they let us know before going down for our sort of assessment, our evaluation, that, they kind of had the bets on. So that gave it a little bit of added spice. So me and Recruit Hattrick, you kind of go down to the base commanders or the base commander's offices. You get inspected, because you're wearing your best uniform and stuff. So you're getting inspected. You then go in and sit in front of the board. You do this kind of assessment, this sort of evaluation, and then you come out and you sort of wait to hear if either of you has been successful. Because of course, they may,
you may not have been.
They may not get awarded for our King's Squad. So we kind of came out, and of course, we were both very, very nervous. But then we went back to the accommodation block, and by then the news had kind of trickled over to the training team that I'd been successful, and I'd been awarded the King's Badge, and I had an inkling that I'd done well, because again, that preparation piece, I'd put myself in the best possible position to do well for the King's Badge. So I got it. Obviously, was an overwhelming sense of achievement. As I said, the Green Beret was the key, but getting the King's Badge on top of that was the real cherry on top of the cake. Obviously, Sergeant Sharples was double happy because he'd won the bet, and he'd sort of got the winnings from the other guys. But that was then it. That was kind of the end of training. I'd been awarded my Green Beret. I'd got my King's Badge. We were the senior recruit troop. I was the sort of senior guy as the King's Badgeman. And that was the end of training. And it was quite, this was, we were having our passing out parade, the kind of final parade when your family come down and stuff. And, that was scheduled for December 16th, 1999. So we were the last recruit troop of the millennium. Yeah. So we were then going to go on leave for 2 weeks over Christmas and New Year, and then we would go off to our postings. And the thing at the end of recruit training, you get told where you're going. You're going to 40 Commando, you're going to 42 Commando, you're going to 45 Commando, whatever the case may be. As King's Badgeman, you get a bit more choice around where you're going. You get asked, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to a unit? Do you want to do something else? And what a lot of King's Badgemen did is they would go to their local careers office.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, they're in quite a good place to do so. They're fresh out of training. They're the top recruit. They go to their careers office. They're seeing guys that are coming in that are showing an interest in the Royal Marines, interested in joining the Royal Marines. They're the perfect sort of poster boys, if you like, as an advertisement for the Royal Marines. So that was kind of offered to me. Do you want to go to Chelmsford careers office? And kind of spend a little bit of time there. But this kind of single-minded nature about wanting to be a Royal Marine, wanting to get out there and get my hands dirty, my sort of boots on the ground, I've got no interest in going to a careers office at all. I want to get out to a unit. I want to be plying my trade as a Royal Marine. And at that stage, 42 Commando down in Plymouth, they were gearing up to become the UK Rapid Response Force.
Right, okay.
So it's got to be 42 Commando. I want to go to 42 Commando. I'll have my leave period, but then I want to go down there. So I was, I was posted to 42 Commando. So we had our passing out parade. I went home for the 2 weeks, to Dad's and then to Mum's over the Christmas and New Year period. Had a great New Year. Obviously, it was the millennium, so we had a great New Year, and then travelled down to Plymouth to join 4-2 Commando at the start of January 2000.
Right.
And it's funny, and I'm sure this taps into what a lot of other guys across all military services will tell you. You go from being kind of top of the tree, in recruit training, senior recruit troop, senior recruit stuff. And then you join your unit and you're kind of knocked off your perch very, very quickly because you are starting again. You're the most junior person there. Irrespective of whether you've got a King's badge or not, you've got guys there that have been in the Corps for, a couple of years, some of them a few years, whatever the case may be. And you're suddenly very junior again. So it's like, oh, wow,
You're the new T-boy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is very much so. So, again, it's back to basics again. It's establishing yourself with that group of people. It's doing all you can to kind of, gain these people's trust, showing them that, the recruit training was good and that you learned a lot and that you can, be valuable within this unit. And I very much did that. We went off on a number of exercises in the UK and around Europe as well. And I was fitting in really well. I was starting to represent the unit in some sports. I was clearly, obviously, very, very physically fit and robust, even amongst a group of very fit and robust guys. I was sort of very, very much at the pinnacle, the kind of pinnacle of that. And I was enjoying life. It was really, really good. We were doing well on the exercises. We were having a good unit, building up really good relationships. And then, of course, in 2000, it started kicking off in Sierra Leone in West Africa. And at this stage, we were doing a big exercise in the south of France. We were just outside Marseille in a big military training area there. And we were actually doing a big exercise with a number of other NATO forces. And this competition, which was all based around, infantry and fighting and stuff. Me and my section, so me and 3 other guys in my section, we actually won it. Across all these other groups, we won it, and I was kind of leading that. So this was great. I was doing really, really well, and then sort of Sierra Leone came along, and this was almost that kind of segue. It's like, we're doing really well. Now we're going out on operations. This is the next building block. Yeah. This is exciting stuff. We're getting out on operations. We're getting out on the ground. So, we jumped on board, or we were put on board HMS Ocean, and sailed round there. And of course, we wanted to be there. We wanted to be there first. We were beaten there by a couple of days by the Paras, who had actually flown down from the UK. So they got there first. Okay. And of course, so there was a little bit of needle when we got there. Of course, there's always going to be a rivalry between the Royal Marines and the Paras. So we got down there. And it was exciting. It wasn't like an Iraq or Afghanistan. Also, I wasn't in Iraq or Afghanistan, but it was tailor made for the Royal Marines, or indeed the Paras. We were flying in on helicopters and fast roping out of the helicopters onto the beaches. We were getting into, the big Land Rovers with the big .5 guns on the top, and we were sort of driving inland to try to stop the rot. Ultimately, you had the West Side boys, the real troublemakers down there that were causing havoc. They were causing untold atrocities, and our job was to get down there and to obviously try to stop that rot. But what a place to do it, sort of jungle warfare. Obviously the Royal Marines are very, very big on that. It's one of our areas of expertise. So getting out there and doing that, it was, it wasn't nice. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't nice.
But how did you feel? You're sailing down there. How did you feel about what you were going to face when you got there? Well, did you know where you were going?
Yeah. No, we absolutely knew. Yeah, and we knew that it was going to get reported on in the press as well, actually. And it's funny, you sort of speak to my mum now because, sort of people say to her, oh, your sons were in the military. How did you deal with it when they were going to places and stuff like this? And she'll always say, they very rarely told us anything about it. And that was very much the case with this. So we were out in Marseille. We got given the orders that we were going to be going to Sierra Leone because it was going bad there. and we knew it was going to be reported upon in the media, typically by the tabloid press. So our families were going to see it. So we could tell our families that we were going away on operations, but we couldn't go into detail of exactly where or why.
Yeah, of course.
So I remember picking up the phone in a public phone box. Lovely little marina there in Marseille. We were out having a couple of drinks, and lovely little marina there. And we were kind of all given the orders to go out and sort of give our families the heads up if we wanted to. So I picked up the phone in this phone box to my mum and literally just said, you're going to see news over the next couple of days about the Royal Marines going somewhere on operations because there's a bit of trouble, and I'm part of that. I said, don't worry, I'm going down there, but with the Royal Marines, we know what we're doing. So she was, naturally, over the end of the phone, she was obviously quite anxious and upset about it. But for me, it was like, great, let's get down there. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get down there. Let's get boots on the ground. And all the way there, we didn't really know what to expect. We didn't know quite how bad it was going to be. All we knew is that we had this big group of drug-addled blokes, kids and women as well, armed to the teeth with old bloody Russian AK-47s and stuff that were literally just going from place to place, causing absolute carnage, going into villages and towns, slaughtering people. Because it was all about, obviously, the diamond mines in the east of the country, the money being made from there, and that was obviously feeding, the sort of. It was just a messy environment, but we didn't really know, sort of how difficult it was going to be for us, how tough these guys were going to be to fight against, etc. So we kind of went there, kind of eyes wide open, and just thought we're going to get in there, we'll get onto the ground, we'll go deep into country and see what we come up against. Yeah, obviously, we'd put together battle plans and stuff, but we didn't really know what we would find. So we spent. Those weeks that we were there, literally doing that, going from village to village, kind of ridding them of these troublemakers, the West Side Boys and stuff, working with other forces that were there as well to improve the situation and, ultimately try to give some hope to these poor villagers that had been, had untold atrocities, sort of wrought upon them by these West Side Boys. So we had a few weeks there. We then were taken over by some other military units, some army units, and we then went back home. I mean, I returned to Sierra Leone another 2 times after that. Oh, okay. Sort of in 2001. But we went back home, and I actually got home just in time for Simon's wedding to Sue in middle of 2000. And it's kind of at that stage, bearing in mind I'd just come back off of, an operation out in the jungle of Sierra Leone. Again, I was fit, I was robust, I was doing really well at the unit. There was clearly, there was going to be a good future for me in the Royal Marines. I was achieving things, I was making my mark. I was living my best life at that time, turning up at that wedding and being in Portsmouth for those few days over the wedding. I was in a really, really good place. And I think that probably told as well, confident guy, confident but not arrogant, but, I was, I was doing all the right things. I was in a really good place. I was, 2000. So I was, just turned 21. I wasn't earning fortunes because no one in the military earns fortunes, but, I didn't really have any big outgoings. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have kids. I didn't even have a car, because I couldn't even drive at that time. But not a care in the world other than being a good Marine. And it was always, sort of certainly in the Royal Marines, but I dare say probably in the Paras and a number of other forces as well. It's very much, sort of work hard, play hard. And we'd really go and kind of, sort of smash it out on a night out or whatever, we'd go and enjoy ourselves because we'd worked hard, particularly, sort of coming off operations in Sierra Leone and stuff. So, I was in a really, really good place at that time. There was a good career in the Royal Marines coming up for me. But I think with that confidence and with that, that kind of lifestyle that I was leading, when we when we were in Plymouth, when we were at 4-2 Commando, when we weren't away on exercises or operations, the weeks it's a pretty simple life, considering the level of training that you go through. Actually, when you're at base, when you're at your barracks, it's a pretty easy life. You're sort of on a Monday to Friday basis. You get up first thing in the morning, you have breakfast. You'll go out and do your physical training. You go out for, an 8-mile run maybe, or you'd sort of do something up on the moors maybe. You'd come back, you'd get showered, you'd get into uniform, you'd spend some time in the classroom, or you'd go out and you'd do, sort of practicing drills, sort of doing, sort of abseiling or rock climbing or something. Then you'd do a bit of admin in the afternoon, make sure that everything was okay, and then your evening was your own. If you wanted to go out, you'd go out. If you wanted to go and see your girlfriend, for those people that had girlfriends or whatever, they'd kind of do that. Or if you just wanted to sit in your accommodation and just chew the fat with your mates and play on your PlayStation or whatever, you'd kind of do that.
Yeah. And
it's a pretty easy existence.
But you've worked hard to get to that existence.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely.
It hasn't just been given to you. I think you're making it sound like it, but you've actually gone through a process there. Wednesday afternoons, you'd have your sports afternoon.
Oh yeah,
all that sorts of stuff. But
yeah, and don't get me wrong, an 8-miler on a daily basis now would flipping near on kill me, I dare say. But back then it was, easy, dare I say. We'd kind of, we'd go out. And as I say, I was a very fit guy at this time as well, as, and I was surrounded by guys as well. I was representing 4-2 Commando, in the core boxing championships. So, I was a fit guy. It was all there. But the point is, when you're at the barracks, it's pretty easy going at that kind of stage, and the only difference to that would be your weekends, because you'd get your accommodation block. You'd do your phys on a Friday morning. You then come back. You'd get your accommodation block sort of squared away. You'd have someone come in and do an inspection, whether that was your troop sergeant or your troop commander or your company commander. Maybe they'd do an inspection, assuming everything was okay and everyone had their kit in order and the accommodation in order. It would then typically be, sort of 1-2 o'clock. Right, lads, the rest of your weekend is your own, and I'll see you Monday. And you'd kind of go out, for us, we'd go down to Plymouth city centre on late sort of Friday afternoon. We'd be out all afternoon, all evening. We'd come back. We'd kind of do the same on Saturday. On a Sunday, we may sort of get up and, blow the cobwebs out a little bit with a little bit of fizz on a Sunday, but then probably go out in the afternoon for a few more beers. And then you'd kind of, Monday, you'd be back to the routine again. And that's just the way it was. So when you weren't away, when you weren't off on exercises in Senny Bridge or out in Europe somewhere or anywhere around the world, and you weren't on operations, you're just kind of biding your time. You're treading water. You're keeping yourself fit. You're keeping yourself sort of motivated and stuff. But
you're always battle ready.
You're always battle ready, yeah. And as I say, at this time, and this is kind of late 2000, year 2000, it was all in the right place for me. Everything, I was ticking all the right boxes. This isn't to blow smoke up my backside, but, it was a good place. I was doing well, but I was very confident. We'd go out and, I'd be the guy that would be cracking the jokes at the bar that people would be, sort of listening in on and stuff. I had a good group of mates, we all bounced things off one another. It was a good group, and you say, I'd have, we'd all have sort of casual relationships, kind of on-off girlfriends and stuff in the local area. And of course, Plymouth is a bit of a hotbed, because you've got the Royal Marines there. Of course, we were there with 4-2 Commando. You've also got the Royal Marines at Stonehouse Barracks. You've got 2-9 Commando down there, so part of the army. You've got other army units there. You've got the Royal Navy, of course, who've got a huge presence there. You've got university students. You've got, obviously big Plymouth Uni there. And then, of course, you've got your civvies who have to put up with this, eclectic mix of people. So it was a real mix of people there. And I say we used to have a really nice time. We'd have a good, enjoyable time. It was a good time. And I suppose, and this isn't detrimental to the person that I'm going to come on to speak about, but I got into a very serious relationship at that time. As I say, it had all been very casual to that point. I hadn't really had any girlfriends at school age because I just wasn't confident enough to ask a girl out, let alone hold down a relationship. And I had kind of casual relationships during my time in the Royal Navy, nothing really sort of committed. And as I said, at the start of Royal Marines training, I wasn't in a significant relationship at that time. It was very, very easy going. But I met a young lady out on a Saturday night out in Plymouth. And this quickly developed into, a sort of a very serious relationship. I fell in love very, very quickly with her, I've got to say. It was a very fast paced relationship. She was a bit younger. She was in college. Obviously I was 21 and in my first year at the Royal Marines. And it was a very fast paced, very sort of quickly developing relationship. I obviously fell in love with her. Her family, liked me. I liked being with her and her family. And I think at this time, the Royal Marines started to play second fiddle a little bit, because for this first time I was in this sort of serious relationship, and my focus was then on my girlfriend. I was still a very good Royal Marine. Don't get me wrong. As I say, we went back out to Sierra Leone a couple of times. We did various other exercises, but I just didn't enjoy or didn't get the same excitement about going away as I did, because I wanted to be with my girlfriend. And I think the best example of that would be at the start of 2001, when 4-2 Commando, we were traveling to Norway from January to March to do our Arctic warfare training. Take me back to, June, July time. I'd have, sort of given you my right arm to go out there and do it. Now, in this serious relationship with my girlfriend, I wasn't looking forward to it very much. No. I wasn't really excited about going out there. Norway's a big deal as well, because the Royal Marines are, the sort of the UK's kind of Arctic warfare training kind of carder. We sort of lead the way when it comes to fighting in those conditions. And it's a big thing, sort of getting a Norway tick in the box in your career. But I really wasn't looking forward to it very much. It would have meant I'd be away from my girlfriend January, February, March. So, yeah, I went there. To say why I was there, I didn't enjoy it too much either, because I just wanted to be with my girlfriend. So I probably didn't get as much out of that trip as I could have done or probably should have done. And that just that continued on. That continued on while I was in this relationship.
How do you feel about that now, though? Because looking back, that the dedication that you put into getting into the Royal Marines, how do you feel about that? Those almost negative thoughts whilst you were there.
Yeah, I don't regret being in the relationship with the girlfriend, because she was wonderful and she has no fault here at all. No. She was just being a girlfriend. But for me, I should have remembered. I should have focused on the right things. I think it's through my lack of experience in serious committed relationships at that time. I just allowed myself to focus more on her than I did on the Royal Marines and on my career. And that really sort of continued to sort of emphasize itself, as the relationship went on. I was still doing good stuff. I was still, sort of achieving well. I was still going out and doing well in exercises. I'd kind of received a promotion to Lance Corporal by this stage. As I say, we went back out to Sierra Leone twice again on different operations. I'd received some commendations from, sort of senior military officials that were out there. So I was still doing a good job as a Royal Marines, but there was just, I was just... a lot of my focus was on my girlfriend.
You decided that the Royal Marines was no longer for you as a direct result of this relationship.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah, because I was looking ahead to the future and thinking, I want to be with this girl for the long term, and I'm not sure I want to spend the next 20 years spending 9 months of the year away. I want to be with her more than that. I don't just want to be with her 3 months of the year. So it started eating away at me a little bit. as certainly as 2001 kind of carried on and the relationship continued to develop, as it transpired, one thing led to another, but we actually, this wasn't a real long-term relationship either, but it was very fast paced. It was sort of very quick. I think it was probably her first serious relationship as well as mine. But for one reason or another, we ended up splitting up.
Had you put your ticket in at this point?
I hadn't. No. I was. This was towards the back end of 2001, and I think it was that kind of broke the camel's back, if you like. I would already at that stage had lost this focus with the Royal Marines, if you like. But then splitting up with my girlfriend, it hit me quite hard. It really did hit me quite hard, and I think it shifted my focus even more to the point that, I became a little bit disenfranchised with the Royal Marines at that point. I was like, I don't really want to be doing, I don't really want to be around Plymouth anymore. I don't want to be, associated with this area anymore. What I should have done is looked at opportunities to go to another unit. I should have gone to a 40 commando or a 4-5 commando, removed myself from the environment where my now ex-girlfriend was, and given myself a fresh start somewhere else.
But I didn't.
No, I didn't. We were gearing up for a tour to Northern Ireland instead in 2002. And I suppose that in itself, that could have galvanised the situation, spending 6 months away in South Armagh. But it didn't. It had the opposite effect. And if anything, it probably reduced my appetite for wanting to stay in the Royal Marines even more, because I again, not detrimental to anything that happened in Northern Ireland, because during the Troubles, obviously it was a very, very dangerous place, and a lot of people lost their lives there. But in 2002, even in South Armagh, which is where we were, there wasn't a huge amount going on there. Obviously, the peace agreement had been reached in the late 90s.
Yeah.
It was a better environment then than it had ever been, certainly back to 1969 when the Troubles had occurred. So I felt probably a little bit wasted being out there. And again, that's not detrimental to any other, sort of arms of the UK Armed Forces. But I just felt that it was a bit of a waste of the Royal Marines being there, sort of sitting in a gatehouse or sitting in a watchtower. At that time, I was like, we're Royal Marines, for goodness sake.
How do you feel about that now? Because, it does sound, you're my cousin, you're my friend, but that sounds like quite arrogant, if I'm perfectly honest with you.
It does, yeah. And I'd agree with you wholeheartedly, but that was my kind of mindset at the time. I was in a strange place. I was in a bit of a sulk from my split up from my girlfriend. I had by this time put my 12 months notice in to leave the Royal Marines. And although I was becoming disenfranchised with the Royal Marines, there was, it was still the Royal Marines at the end of the day. I was kind of on my way out, but I still felt at that time in 2002, if it had been 10 years earlier, it would have been a different feeling, because there was, South Armagh was a very, very dangerous place. But in 2002, it just felt a bit mundane. And yes, I know it comes across as sounding arrogant, but I just felt like we could be doing other things, more commando-based things, as opposed to sitting in a gatehouse or sitting in a watchtower or sort of patrolling the fields around of South Armagh, which is what we were doing. Completely wrong mindset, and I don't agree with that mindset now at all. No. And don't get me wrong, even though I had those feelings, I still put the effort in. I was still working hard. I was still a fully functioning Royal Marine. But that was just kind of the feeling that I had at the moment. I suppose my head certainly wasn't in the right place at the time. I was kind of, looking at December 2002 at coming out. And we got back from South Armagh in September of 2002. So I then had a couple of months to if I'd wanted to go out and do courses, to go out and look for employment for me to move into in December. But I didn't. And this is, again, kind of testament to the sort of situation I was in at the time, not really doing much to help myself. I suppose it was part of the sensation as well that, something would just land on my doorstep because I would be a former Royal Marine. And of course, everyone would want to employ a former Royal Marine. I kind of had that notion as well, completely unfounded, of course. And that soon came to prove itself. I left in December and initially went back to my dad's in Clacton, with the hope of, or the expectation almost that any job that I applied for would just be offered to me. But first of all, there weren't too many jobs to apply for anyway, because there wasn't a huge amount at that time of employment over the Christmas period in Clacton or Frinton. But also those that I did apply for, I didn't get. So I kind of went into this, I suppose, almost a sort of a period of self-pity almost, sort of, have I made the right decision? Have I not, etc. But I then got in contact with a guy that I'd been in the Royal Navy with, who was living in East London doing some building work. And he said, well, how about, you come up here, you sort of spend some time on me couch, do some work here. It'd be great to be back in touch. So that's exactly what I did. I kind of left my dad's. This was in the new year. I'd gone to East London to be with my mate, and I did some work. And it wasn't a great lifestyle at this time. As I say, I think there was probably still this sort of period of self-pity. I'm not going to go down the route and say that I was, sort of depressed or anything like that, because that is, sort of serious stuff. But I was definitely not in a good place.
No.
I wasn't feeling good about myself. I was sort of self-doubt. Had I made the right decisions? Should I go back in? Should I not go back in, etc. I just wasn't in a very good place. And I think being in East London and in the environment in which I was in, that kind of exacerbated it a little bit and made things worse. The group of people that I was hanging out with, sort of weren't, pillars of society, if you like. I was, sort of in quite a bad place. But then an opportunity came up with this guy, the guy that I was that I'd been in the Royal Navy with. His mum had bought a bar in Magaluf in Mallorca, and wanted him to run it. So he said, well, do you want to come out to Mallorca with me and help me run the bar? So I was like, yeah, fantastic. Happy days. Well, why not? Absolutely. We'll kind of go out there and do that. So I went out there with him, and for the first sort of week or so, maybe week or two, it was okay. I was, we were obviously setting the bar up, ready to open, probably drinking a bit more than we should have done, given the sort of environment. But yeah, it soon started deteriorating because, of course, we were reliant. Our food, our rent and stuff was reliant on how much money we could make from the bar, and of course, there were so many other bars out there. There was a lot of competition. Tough life, yeah. And we didn't get the amount of custom that we'd hoped that we would, try as we might. And it started spiraling. We weren't making any money. We were struggling to find, enough money to sort of feed ourselves and stuff. And it got to a really, really bad position. I was, sort of hanging out with, some sort of questionable characters as well. It was not a good time. It wasn't a good time. Not a good part of my life.
So how did you snap yourself out of it? What did you do?
It was really interesting, actually. It's really interesting you say that. I was in the bar. There weren't many people in it, but I was behind the bar serving, and we had TV channels in the bar. We had Sky News playing. We had Only Fools and Horses on one of the other tellies. The standard stuff that you'd expect from an English bar in Magaluf. And this was, say, probably towards the end of March, I think it was, and the Second Iraq War kicked off, and I was watching the news, and I was watching ultimately the UK advance into Iraq, and it was 4-2 Commando, who of course I'd been with up until December the previous year. And I saw some of the guys that I'd been saying my goodbyes to on December 5th getting off the planes, carrying GPMGs and rifles with Bergens on their back.
And that was you, wasn't it?
Of ammunition. Absolutely, the full bit. And I kind of looked at it, and I was like, Jesus, what
have I done?
What have I done? What have I done here? And I think, I suppose people listening to this would say, well, why didn't you just kind of sign up and go back in? Why didn't you sign up and go back into the military? It wasn't as easy as that. I'd kind of made the decision. I wouldn't have been able to just kind of turn it around and go back in. I'd kind of made my decision. And although I was still struggling with the idea of whether it was a good decision or not, sort of physically and mentally at that time, I really wasn't in a very good place. So I was certainly not in a position to go back in and to be able to offer anything, much in support of that, that war that was being fought in. But what it did do is it kind of snapped me into action insofar as you can do better than what you're doing now. You've got yourself into a real rut here, Matt. But you need to remember that you're a former Royal Marine, you're a former King's Badgeman. Look at yourself, what you were doing a year ago. Look at what you were doing, a few months ago. How have you allowed it? How have you allowed it to come to this? So that kind of snapped me, sort of out of that stage of my life that I was in.
Your pride had gone, hadn't it? I mean,
yeah, it had. Yeah, my pride had gone. And I just sort of had to look at it, kind of critical path analysis almost. What do I need to do to get right? So I was like, well, I need to get back to the UK. I need to find myself work. I need to get myself, on the straight and narrow, as it were. And I had a girlfriend at this time as well. She was back in the UK, but I'd met a girl over the Christmas period in Clacton. I was on a night out with Dad, and he'd gone home early. I'd stayed out, and I'd sort of met this girl, and I'd been with her for a couple of months. And I knew that she was at home as well. So I got together enough money to pay for a flight back, an EasyJet flight back from Mallorca back to Stansted, and then just enough money to get my train ticket from Stansted back to Clacton. So got back there. And again, soon became pretty apparent that, if I wanted work, I was going to have to get closer to London. If I wanted to start building a new career for myself, I was going to have to be closer to London where there'd be more work. And during my time in the military, my mum and my stepdad and my sister by this time had moved to Harlow because my mum's parents, my grandparents, had always lived in Harlow. So they'd moved there because obviously my mum wanted to care for her mum in later stages of life. So I picked up the phone to my mum and said, can I just come and keep on your couch for a couple of months while I get myself some work, get myself sorted? And she said, yeah, absolutely. So I moved in with my mum, with my stepdad Duncan, and my little sister Sophie, and quickly found work. And again, this whole sort of swallowing pride piece, remembering, of course, being a Royal Marine, I was like, well, what kind of work am I going to go into? What qualifications have I got? What do I know how to do? Well, I didn't really have any formal qualifications. But by this stage, having sort of had a sort of fix on what I wanted to do, I had discipline, I had integrity, I had diligence, I was smart, I knew I could do a good job. I had clearly good leadership qualities. Yeah. A lot of things that I knew could be useful to an employer. So I kind of went flicking through the job boards and stuff and thought, well, sort of security, an area of security is going to be probably the sort of de facto option for me here. So I got a job just with a tiny little company working out of Harlow, a man guarding company that were providing security to a warehouse there, to a Comet XL warehouse, and this wasn't, high level security stuff. It was checking the backs of delivery vans. It was doing patrols around the perimeter. It was checking the warehouse. It was, searching delivery drivers, nothing too, nothing too high tech. But it was a start, and I was starting to earn money again. I was starting to get a little bit of pride back, knowing that I was, actually doing something, as opposed to being in this kind of this sort of spiral that I was in previously. And by this stage as well, my relationship with my girlfriend at that time has started developing as well. She we'd got enough money together to be able to rent a place out in Harlow, so we'd kind of moved in together. and interesting how other jobs come from sort of referral and recommendation and stuff. She'd started doing some temping work at GlaxoSmithKline in Harlow. And just in passing conversation with one of the security team members there, she'd said, "Oh, my boyfriend works in security, and he's a former Royal Marine. Are you looking for work?" Because she knew that I was on the lookout for something a bit better. And this guy said, "Yeah, sure, we'll get in touch." So they did get in touch with me, and I got a job at GSK. And this was then, I suppose, another step up and made it, there was that sort of building of pride even more, because, it wasn't just a warehouse that I was protecting. This was a big global pharmaceutical giant that actually had legitimate threats against it, from obviously animal rights protesters, environmental campaigners, protecting their intellectual property, that type of thing. They had legitimate threats against them. So I felt like I was making a difference. And, quickly started establishing myself in the security team there. And just these sort of qualities started coming out again, that I'd sort of built up from my time in the military. So, when there was an incident on site, I would naturally take the lead. Even though I wasn't in a supervisory position or anything at that time, I would naturally just kind of take the lead and give direction to people managing the incident. I would, I was kind of setting myself out, if you like, as a kind of senior person in the security team, even though I was only a security officer at the time. But because of those types of situations occurring, I was then offered a promotion. And again, that's another building block, another, sort of area of pride for me, sort of into a supervisory position. And I sort of felt, sort of good about myself by this point. I'd split up with my girlfriend. She was then my fiance, but it just didn't work out. We just weren't right for one another. So we'd split up by this time. And I'd got in contact with a guy that I'd been in the Marines with who lived in Harlow. Really, really strange. I'd actually bumped into him in the flipping checkout at Tesco's about 6 months previous. I was doing the shop and I bumped into him and I was like, "Martin, what are you doing here?" And he's like, "No, I live in Harlow." I was like, "Oh, right, okay." So, we'd been out for a couple of nights out and stuff. And then when I'd split up from my fiance, I kind of, he was on the lookout for someone to rent a room in his house. So I said, "Yeah, I've got back in touch. Are you still looking for someone to rent your room? I'm I don't want to live on my mum's couch again for too long, bless her. I don't want to be an inconvenience to her, to Duncan or to my sister." So he said, "Yeah, absolutely. If it's yours, then, it's yours if you want it." So, I moved into his spare room, and it was a really, really good move because Martin, I'm still mates with him now. I was best man at his wedding a few years ago. He was a really good Marine. He'd only spent a few years in himself as well. But he was a really good Marine. He was a really good guy. He was a great leveler. He didn't suffer fools gladly. He'd call a spade a spade. And he was just a really good bloke to live with. He was achieving things. Obviously, I was starting to achieve things. And this was sort of 2006, 2007. And we just found ourselves in a really good place. We'd be going out. We had a good group of mates in the sort of area where he lived as well. We were sort of, going out at weekends. And it was just really nice. I was, sort of young, free and single. Our mates were young, free and single. We were going out. We were having a good time in sort of Harlow and the surrounding areas. And, it was nice. And then, one thing leads to another. Before you know it, I've got another job. I'd kind of left GSK, and through referral, I'd got a job, as a security manager, managing an area around sort of London and the home counties. So again, a nice promotion for me. And that gave me an opportunity because it gave me more exposure to London. I saw more opportunities opening up in front of me, still within the security industry. So I applied for a job with a security company working out the city of London and got the job. And then started working for some, big global organisations, with their corporate offices in the city of London. I'm not going to go into, significant detail here, but, sort of really working in security at a corporate level then. And this was, it's exciting stuff. It was good work. It was rewarding work. Certainly. I really felt like I was making a difference. I was meeting some really interesting people, obviously building my network, a lot of ex-military, of course, working in the field at the time and in that area, and getting involved in a lot of good things, a lot of initiatives, joining a lot of organizations, Worshipful Company, a security professional, Security Institute, ACES events, that type of thing, really doing all I could to sort of increase my value in the industry. So, and of course, that had the great effect that, obviously I was getting further promotions. I was earning, sort of really, not really, really good money, but, sort of good money. I'd learned to drive by that time as well. So I had a nice car at home. Things were going really, really well. And then, of course, that again, the sort of cherry on the cake is I then met Emma, my now wife. We'd already known one another from a few years previous because she was friends and had gone to school with my ex-fiance, which was slightly awkward to start with, certainly. But I mean, we'd been split up for long enough time, before I sort of met with Emma and we got together. But again, another building block. Well, I say she was, she still is to this day. She is, a great person to have by your side, whether it was as my girlfriend or my fiance or now my wife of 10 years. She really, really helped. She gave me that stability at home. Obviously, our relationship developed. We went on to have the kids. We got the house, and she was very, very supportive of my relationship, because she could have achieved anything that she wanted as well. She'd had a good education. She was, sort of in a good job when we met. But, she'd naturally wanted to be at home with the kids anyway and be a kind of stay at home mum for a while before going back into work, enjoying the children. She knew that probably out the two of us, if there was going to be someone that was going to earn more money, it was likely to be me because of my exposure, obviously, to London and obviously where I was going in the security industry. So she was really supportive of me, and this included things like, investing our money in courses for me. Because I'd obviously been in the industry for a few years by this point. We'd had the Olympics in London. I'd been working for a client at the time that was quite heavily involved in the delivery of the Olympics as well. So I'd had some involvement in that. And my route was really wanting to go down security risk management. So I invested quite a lot of money in myself in development, in doing courses, and really putting qualifications behind the experiences that I'd gained. And again, that whole piece, making myself as valuable as possible to the industry, not just to potential employers, but to the industry as well. And I suppose now where would we be? Kind of 2015, 2016, working for a big global bank in the city of London, very much embedded with the corporate security team there. And this, as I say, was really interesting stuff, around, their sort of travel risk management for their senior people, going to extreme environments, where they were looking at opening new offices, doing kind of assessment and analysis on that. Threat analysis, obviously, we were starting to get some terrorist attacks occurring in London and, of course, on other banks, other interests around the world. Some really exciting probably isn't the right word. When you talk about terrorist attacks, there's nothing exciting about them. But, being able to get involved in those types of things and our responses to them, and ultimately improving security of the bank, improving security, within London and stuff. I felt like I was really giving something back to the industry. I really felt like I was contributing, and this was supported by, a very stable home life with my wife and kids as well, where everything was going great. It was in a really, really good spot. And I suppose that's kind of what's led on to where I am now. I now work for a security risk management consultancy. Again, we're in the city of London. Can
you name them?
I can do, yeah, absolutely, Give me a shout. Cornerstone Global Risk Group Limited. So interestingly enough, I'd used Cornerstone. I was in another role, And my client in that role had used Cornerstone on a security project. And as part of my role at the time, I engaged with the guys from Cornerstone. So the guy that went on to be is now my boss and one of the guys in my team. I was working with them, and I was like, these guys, this is different level stuff. This is, they are doing a really, really good job. On behalf of the client. They really know their stuff. And that's, that kind of came at the time when I was sort of already investing in myself and really sort of embedding myself in security risk and determining that as a sort of career path, as the career path for me. And I thought that's what I want to do. These guys, what they're doing is really good stuff, so I want to go down the route of being a consultant. And as things happen, I got back in touch with John, who's the CEO of the company, a sort of couple of years later, because I knew that he was on the lookout for some new members to join his team, and he offered me a position within Cornerstone.
Wow!
And it was fantastic. It was like the sort of culmination of all my efforts. This was a great role that he was offering me. It offered me, a level of seniority within Cornerstone. It offered me the opportunity to get involved in some really, really exciting projects with some very exciting clients, again, around the world. And I did it, and that's what I've been doing since January 2001. I joined the company at the kind of latter stages of
January
the lockdown.
2021.
Sorry,
Yeah,
2001. Yeah, January 2021. And we were at the sort of latter stages of the lockdown, so I kind of joined them, and everything was being done sort of virtually. So a lot of my colleagues I didn't actually get to meet for the first couple of months, and it was sort of quite nice. 2 months down the line, shaking hands with someone, and sort of we've been speaking over
Real
Teams
people
for the last couple of months. It's nice to meet you in person, but that's continued, and he's well, not just John, but certainly all of us. So I'm on the board of Cornerstone. There's 8 of us on the board, so we obviously determine the direction of the business, but the leadership of Cornerstone has always been very aspirational. They've not necessarily wanted to be disruptors, but they've wanted to sort of challenge things, do things differently. There's a lot about the security industry in the UK that's been done because that's the way it's always been done. And actually our way of thinking about things is, well, do you know what? There's other ways of doing things. There's other processes, there's other methodologies. Let's not just do it because that's the way it's always been done. Let's, sort of embrace technology, for example. Let's take, the kind of cyber threat into consideration as opposed to just, sort of physical threats, etc. Really taking a holistic approach or a unified approach, as we call it within Cornerstone, a unified approach to security risk management. So you're not just looking at a specific threat actor, but you're actually looking across the whole sphere of what denotes a threat to this particular client, whether they be a bank, whether they be a data center, whether they be a food distributor, whatever the case may be, taking a more holistic approach. And it's, it's really appealing. It's exciting. Every day is different. It works, and it's good. And and I like to think, we have a lot of relationships with other, sort of organisations within the UK. I like to think that we're making a difference, and we're doing things to make the UK, a safer place to live and work. We align ourselves with various standards and various other initiatives and governing bodies and stuff. And we make sure what we're doing is to the best of our ability. And I think that shines through. We've got a fantastic client base. We've got a lot of very loyal clients who are big advocates of ours because we do a job very, very well. And certainly as we are at the moment, we're going from strength to strength. We're a very aspirational company, and it's going in a very good direction.
That's brilliant. So, in the immortal words of Frank Sinatra, regrets, I've had a few. What are your regrets, Matt? I mean, the Marines played a massive part in your life. They've formed you into the person that you are today.
Yeah.
But take yourself back 20 years. Would you be having a word with yourself about coming out of the Marines?
Yeah, I would do. I would do, certainly. But I'm gonna caveat that as well. Yes, certainly in hindsight and in retrospect, I would have stayed in longer. But the caveat to that is if I'd stayed in longer, would I be where I am now? And that's always a question, and I don't just mean that from a professional perspective, but would I have met Emma? Would I have our wonderful children? It's that sort of question mark over it. Yes, I mean, I do have regrets, but I don't let them define me, certainly. Absolutely, I should have tried harder the first time I went to the careers office. That was a regret because I delayed my career by 6 months. I regret taking my eye off the ball and focusing on my girlfriend at the time as opposed to my career in the Royal Marines. Yes, of course, that's a regret. I regret coming out of the Royal Marines, of course, because who knows where that could have gone, what I could have achieved, where that may have gone. Absolutely. I regret not having invested in myself sooner, although my career has achieved a level of success, and I hope certainly more success going into the future. But I regret having not done more courses and more development sooner. Should bear in mind, and again, back to this kind of between 2005 and sort of 2007, 2008 period, I was just kind of coasting. I was getting promotions and stuff, and as I say, I was leading a good life, sort of having that spare room at Martin's house and stuff. But I could have done more, which would have then sped up my career, going further forward. I was kind of coasting at the time with work. Yes, I was doing a good job. I was getting sort of promotions and stuff, but it was very much not it wasn't going as fast as it could have done. I probably could have. And again, not wanting to sort of blow smoke up my backside or anything, but I could have achieved what I've achieved now, maybe sort of 5 years sooner, if you like. Yeah. I could have helped myself a bit more and invested in myself a bit quicker than I did. That kind of realization dawned on me in the sort of 2013, 2014 that your employer is only going to invest so much in you. They'll provide you with the courses that they need you to do that's beneficial to their organization. But if you want to do something else, you've got to invest in yourself. And it took me a little while to kind of understand that or to really grasp that. So, I was a little bit slow off the mark on that. So again, not necessarily a regret, but maybe you could have done that a bit faster. Yeah. But hey, geez, I'm 43 years old. There's still a whole nother.
You've still got time, mate.
I've still got a long old time, and as I say, I'm certainly in a good place at the moment with personal life, with professional life. It's in a good place.
Good man. Well, look, Matt, you're my cousin. I love you lots, and I'm grateful for your candour, and we're very proud of what you've done, mate.
Cheers, Paul. Appreciate it. Thanks.